Another Apple event. I feel like we've had several here lately. The One More Thing event from Apple, M1, Apple Silicon, a complete revamp for Apple's hardware laptops. Larry Dignan, Adrian Kingsley-Hughes here with me, Beth Motter. Guys, what do you think? What was it like? It was a bit of a breakup with Intel.
Absolutely. What we watched there was 50-minute breakup video with Intel. It was a Dear John video. It's not you, it's me. Oh, wait a minute, it is you. Look what we did first out the gate. We're faster than you, we're better than you, and we can do it at the same price. But I also saw a lot of weird stuff there. It was, I mean, I was amazed the number of times Apple said up to in terms of performance differences. Up to is a very fluid thing when Apple does it. I'd love to see these things hands-on. Just how much more powerful, how much better. But Apple did it. We've got a lot more battery life, a lot more performance. Yeah, it delivered.
I think the instant reaction I saw from some analysts were like, okay, so they kind of had a chart showing, you know, the chip was better, but there were no benchmarks. There were no, I mean, anybody following the process market is used to having 60 footnotes at the bottom that you can dig into, whether it's AMD versus Intel or whoever. You kind of want to see all those benchmarks and see how they came up with that. You know, that said, I mean, I kind of looked at it and said, all right, you know, it's one of those things, it's typical Apple, right? You buy in and you're like 5 seconds after that call, you're like, okay, let's buy. And then 15 minutes later, you're like, I don't know, right? Because you know Apple Silicon's the future, but you also know Apple Silicon's going to have some kinks to work out. And, you know, the fact that they were talking to developers a whole lot during that presentation is kind of telling. So yeah, I kind of looked at the Mac Mini as a nice hedge, right? It's a cheap Apple laptop. If you want to test out the Mac Mini, and you want to test out the M1 chip to see how the emulation works and all that, then that's probably the route to go for $699. You know, I was almost hoping that there would be more price cuts because they're not paying the Intel tax anymore, right? So that was another thing that kind of made me wonder. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like with each passing, you know, hour from that event, I'm starting to rethink things a lot more.
Yeah, so you mentioned it was really geared towards developers. If you're a developer, where do you start? Which device do you get?
Well, it's always a tough call, isn't it? I think if you've got all the money to throw at it, you're going to have one of each. I think the Mac Mini again. Yeah, it seemed like the Mac Mini seemed so compelling for the price. The Air just felt like we've seen that before. It's a little bit faster. The Pro, there's always better Pros, and I think that was the problem with the Pro. I think that's going to have to wait for the Apple to really decide to push and go to the higher end, the 16-inch models. So the Mini sat in that point where it's cheap. It can just slot in on my desk. I can play with it. And if I don't like it, well, it's 600 odd bucks. I can just leave it on the side like a paperweight.
I mean, I don't know about a paperweight, but it's, yeah, it's like one of those mid-range smartphones you buy, right? Where you're kind of like, yeah, I dropped it. All right, it's dead, but I got a year out of it. And you're kind of okay with it, right? Yeah, I think the one question I have is sort of the Air. Like they played up the performance gains on the MacBook Air. So do I want the Pro then? If the Air is doing so much better performance-wise? I don't know. Beth, you're editing video all the time. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that was kind of where I questioned the difference between the Air and the Pro. I've always ran the Pro for video software and it's so much faster and it helps, and I kill Airs incredibly quickly, but I don't know, M1 acts like the Air is going to do what the Pro does. I wasn't sold on why I need to spend that much more money to buy the Pro. They seemed very
it was very interesting to see a single chip sort of presented in 3 different ways. And I can understand between the Pro and the Air that there was all this thermal system. You've got fans and noise, and mine will probably sound like it takes off in a minute. And so the Air won't have that. But it was very odd to see this one chip almost presented as 3 different things. And I did notice that on the site now they've got the listings for hardware on there now. And the really low end Air comes with a 7-core GPU, not the 8-core GPU. So that's a little bit of differentiation there. But really, yeah, I couldn't see where all these numbers were coming from. It seems like, yeah, it's this much better here, this much better there. But yeah, we need benchmarks to really pull it together.
Yeah, and you're making a purchase that's, you know, you're talking anywhere from $1,000 to 1,500 or so. And that's a little bit of a tough sell for a processor that hasn't been battle tested yet. The one thing that did stick out to me though is they had that one developer talking about, you know, how it makes their workflow easier from iPhone to iPad to Mac. I think that alone will probably have a lot of people interested. Assuming they're not running Tableau or some software that needs an Intel chip. But most of the stuff they do is, you know, say it's coding and web-based apps and things like that and stuff in a browser, then, you know, that connection, that connective tissue between the Apple portfolio, I think could be compelling.
So I guess the big question is, do you buy into the M1 this early?
I'd have to say no. That said, the Mini looks pretty cool to me. So I might have a Apple desktop running around in that little mini form factor.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. That the Air and the Pro just didn't feel like it fitted anywhere in my ecosystem, because if I want a Pro, I'd probably go for the higher version Intel Pros at the moment with a 16-inch display. But that Mini, yeah, that's calling to me. And so I could see myself having another one on the desk, seeing what it's like. But I'm also aware that if this is what M1 is like out of the gate, in 2 years' time, it's going to be so much better. And this is what we're seeing, is these are the first few steps. In 2 years' time, who knows where this is going to be? So it's Apple's game. This is what it is. We're going to be buying Macs every year like we're buying iPhones every year.
I do think there's a risk in, so you can see all the Apple marketing is going to go behind the M1. So, you know, my hunch is that's going to make the transition go faster. On the other hand, what if you're a person who's kind of like, well, I don't need to be an early adopter here, so I'm not, but I'm also not buying an Intel-based Mac either, even though they're supporting it for years to come, because I don't want to run into a wall at some point in the future. So you're almost, in some ways, you know, you're kind of stuck. Like your best case scenario would be to have a MacBook now that's fairly new, and you're saying, I'll see how this plays out in 2 years. Then you're kind of in a sweet spot. If you're looking to buy now, I think you're in a bit of a bind. You know, it all depends on the lifespan of your existing laptop, really.
And it's also not just laptops as well. It's where the iMac's going to go next as well. That's interesting. And is Apple going to extend this out into the Mac Pro? Because they've talked about the whole ecosystem, and replacing Xeon is a much bigger task than replacing Intel Core chips. And if Apple can get that distance going and actually push that, it's really doing well with the silicon out the gate. So in the next 2 years, who knows? I think, yeah, these are just aimed at developers who want that quick transition tool. I think, yeah.
But you're right, though. If it replaces a Xeon, then that's saying something. And that'll speed up the transition even faster, right? Because then you'll say, well, okay, so they really backed this up. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, everybody, I think if you're buying a MacBook right now, you're kind of in this weird spot.
Yeah, well, the future is clearly Apple, clearly M1. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think I'm more intrigued to see how many people actually buy in. So for more things Apple and everything tech, be sure to stick with ZDNet. Thanks for watching.